Hello, dear friends, and welcome to this session of the Bible on One Foot. This is our third video in the series. In the first video is kind of an introduction to the Bible on One Foot, and we talked about the Bible itself, how it's a unique book inspired by God. Just some of the amazing facts of the Bible and the history of it, how it got to us. In the first session, we talked about origins. We talked about the kind of ongoing debate that has been going on for centuries and millennia, but especially in more modern times, the debate between creation and evolution. I mentioned I prefer using terms like origins and intelligent design because they, I guess, tend to be a little more inviting and less off-putting to those who hold different points of view. I hope that was beneficial. Today, we want to pick up where we left off, and that is on the so-called 6 days of creation. But based on what we have learned already, we might want to call these 6 days of creation the 6 days of restoration or renovation or renewal or something like that. First of all, I want to mention that this is the first chart. The one that you're looking at now is the first chart in a book of charts, a series of charts by Dr. Alfred Eade. Dr. Eade passed away some time ago, but his family has kept a publishing company going that keeps his materials in circulation, for which I'm very glad, because I really like the materials that he produced. Publishing company is called Oak Knoll Publishing. It's run by his family. If you would try to obtain the book of charts from some sources on the internet, you would just pay an arm and a leg for them. But Oak Knoll Publishing provides 4 of the books of charts that Dr. Eade produced. There is this one, and I believe the name of this series is The Plan of the Ages. All of these chart books are called Panorama series. That's kind of the theme word. So this one's The Plan of the Ages. There was one about angels and angelology. There is one about the second coming of Christ, and there is a book of charts about the book of Revelation. If you're interested in diving deeply into that last book of the Bible, Oak Knoll Publishing can provide you with all the visual material that you would like. And those books contain not only charts, but also Bible study material to kind of talk you through the charts. But I've always been kind of a visual person, so I appreciate visual images, and I'm going to use that as a basis for my teaching throughout this series, The Bible on One Foot. I think I shared with you in the first video, in the introduction, that I contacted Oak Knoll Publishing a number of years ago and requested permission to photograph these charts and use them in Bible teaching formats, which is what I'm doing now. And they were gracious enough to provide me with that permission. So I very much appreciate that. Appreciate Dr. Eade. And just want to continue from where we left off before. This first chart, the one you're looking at now, actually provides us with a nice kind of a review of what we talked about, especially the last time. This chart begins on the left side with the first verse of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, let me say at the outset that I added an S to the word heavens. Dr. Eade used the traditional King James Version of the Bible. And one of the few mistakes that's in the old King James Version is that the word heavens was translated in the singular in the first verse of the Bible. We learned quite a lot from this first verse of the Bible, especially when we dig into the Hebrew original, the inspired language of this Bible verse. In the beginning, we emphasized, was not the beginning of God. He's an eternal being. We looked at some Bible passages that assert and explain and kind of defend that point of view, that God has neither beginning or end. He is well known to those who are familiar with the Greek as the Alpha and the Omega. In one of the videos, I used the Hebrew letters Aleph and Tav, the first and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet, to as kind of a symbolic representation of the eternality of God. I think we even spoke about the ancient the Kabbalah and the Zohar that spoke of God as the Ein Sof, that which is without end, the infinite. So God is the infinite being. And we also mentioned the fact that the word God in Hebrew is Elohim, and it's a plural noun, which is kind of interesting in light of the fact that in that sentence, the word created, bara in Hebrew, is in the singular. And that is either grammatically incorrect or God is trying to tell us something about himself. And my theory is, my belief, my conviction is that here in the very first verse of the Bible, God is portrayed for us as plural, as a multiplicity of persons, 3 to be exact, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But yet there is only one God. The oneness of God being emphasized here is not numerical singularity, although it is true that the God of the Bible is the one and only true God. There are lots of false gods and counterfeit gods floating around out there, but he's the one and only true one. But the emphasis in the oneness is relationship, it's harmony, it's being joined together in love and common goals and things like that. And I mentioned that human marriage, which is instituted by God very early on in the Bible, is a kind of a symbol. It's of that relational oneness. The Bible says a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two shall become one. Not one in numerical singularity, but one in relationship, in commitment and harmony and love and common goals that men and women have when they get married. So the triune God created the heavens and the earth. We mentioned that in the Bible, there are 3 heavens that are spoken of. The first is the atmosphere around the earth. The second heaven is outer space with all the stars and planets and whatever else is out there. And then the third heaven is the place where God lives. It's also called paradise, the Father's house with many mansions. It is a real place, but I struggled a little bit to call it an immaterial place, a spiritual place, a kind of a transcendent place. I have to be careful of the words that I speak because I don't want you to get the idea that the third heaven is not a real place. It is very much a real place. I imagine the uniqueness of that is that it probably cannot be perceived with the naked eye, the human, the physical eyes in our physical bodies and so forth. But the word heavens is actually not plural in the Hebrew, it's dual. So I think although there are 3 heavens that are mentioned in the Bible, 2 of those are a part of the material creation. That is the first heaven, the atmosphere around the earth, and the second heaven, the stars and planets and everything else that's out there in space. But then the spiritual one, the celestial one, that's probably a poor word too, The immaterial one is the third heaven, the place where God lives. So I think that's where the duality comes from. We also talked about the word earth is eretz in Hebrew, and it can mean the whole planet, or it can mean the dry land as opposed to all the ocean real estate. And it can also be kind of a special, narrowly defined term of the promised land, which plays a big role in the Bible. We also ventured into the second verse of the Bible, Genesis 1:2, that says, "And the earth was without form and void." At least that's the way it's translated in the King James Version of the Bible. This word was, hayta, in Hebrew, can actually be translated was or became. And the difference of those two is hugely significant. We look to Isaiah chapter 45, verse 18, to get some contextual assistance in determining whether the earth was originally formless and void in kind of a chaotic state, or if it became that way later on because of some incident or something like that, and came to the conclusion that there was an incident. We also looked into the broader text of the Bible from Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah chapter 14 to get a little bit of the history of what took place before the earth became formless and void. And that seemed to be the rise and fall of a particular angel named Lucifer. Lucifer, at least in the King James and New King James version. That's an English kind of a translation of the Hebrew word Halel. Halel means the shining one, the brilliant one, whatever that was the name of the great angel, the cherub angel, ruling angel that we know as Lucifer. He started out brilliantly in his career, but his beauty, his skill, his capabilities, his talents seemed to have gotten the best of him and became prideful. And to the extent that he believed that he could do a better job of ruling the universe than the God who created it. So he and 1/3 of the angels who followed him in his rebellion assaulted the throne of heaven and were soundly defeated, perhaps by God's mighty power, or because he and his 1/3 of the angels were fighting with 2/3 of the angels who remained holy. And Lucifer was defeated. He became the enemy of God and the accuser of God and man, although man had not been invented at that point in time. This age in which this happened is oftentimes called the Age of Angels. It's called the prehistoric age because Genesis 1:3 really begins the historical period of Earth's history. Sometimes called the pre-Adamic age, that is the age before Adam, because we, in our studies so far, human beings have not been invented yet. So with that in mind, this depicts in the beginning when God created the heavens and the earth, and here we see the planet Earth all lighted up. And then we have kind of this gloom and blackness. The earth was without form and void. That's as a result of the judgment that Jeremiah 4 discusses. Darkness was on the surface of the deep. Apparently, the earth was covered with flood waters, waters of a flood of judgment. And I remind you, this is not talking about Noah's Ark flood. That will come hundreds of years later. But this is the kind of original flood of the pre-Adamic earth. I even showed you one picture of a Bible chart similar to these that depicts the dinosaurs living in that prehistoric age, right about the place where science would like to have them. I don't think there's any way of telling, just based on biblical information, how long the age of angels or the prehistoric age lasted. If science is correct, and the whole thing started 14.5 billion years ago, then fine and dandy, maybe it is that long. If there are some errors in science, then perhaps it was a shorter period of time. I kind of suspect it was a shorter period of time, because there's some good science going on in the Christian community that shows that there is geological evidence, there's scientific evidence that the Earth is much younger than suspected. The very long age of the Earth is required to try to get all the evolution that is proposed to come about. And actually, it's just fighting a losing battle, because it doesn't matter how long a period of time is allowed for these mutations to develop into more sophisticated, better organized, better equipped organisms. It just doesn't happen, because the second law of thermodynamics, the law of entropy, says that things get more disorganized as time goes on. They don't get better, they get worse. So with that in mind, we now launch into the 6 days, or actually, I guess we could say 7 days. The seventh day is kind of a special one, where no creation takes place in that day. So I think I'm going to call these 6 days the days of restoration. I think that's the word I will prefer, but I may come up with some synonyms for that. So we've got the 6 days here, and just keep in mind that they happen after the prehistoric age and after the judgment that came on the earth. And who knows how long the earth was formless and void. It may have been a very long time, may have been a very short time. So let's go on to the next slide here. And I showed you this in one of the previous videos. We have been introduced to this guy, to Satan. As I mentioned before, his name was originally Lucifer, or if you prefer the Hebrew, Halel, the shining one, the brilliant one. And here it shows him assaulting the throne of God, attacking the throne of God and being defeated. Ezekiel calls him the anointed cherub who covers, and we'll have a little bit more to say about that later. But here he is being cast down to earth, more specifically to Eden, the Garden of Eden, which we will take up in one of the near future videos. But I wanted to show you this slide again, because we have not heard the last of Satan or Lucifer. He is involved throughout the Bible, particularly in his efforts to foil the plan of God for the ages, for God's creation. He tries to interfere with that. He tries to defeat it. He's obviously fighting a losing battle, because he's a finite created creature who is trying to battle the infinite, unlimited, almighty God. So he should know better. But actually, he has been judged, and there's no repentance for him. His eternal destiny has been determined, and that has left him in an angry, hostile state. And so he's angry at God. He's angry at those holy angels, and he's especially angry at you and me. So throughout our studies, we'll be looking at the various strategies and tactics and attempts that Satan will undertake to defeat the plans of God. But without any further delay, let's begin with our 6 days of restoration. The first day is summarized by Dr. Eade as light appearing, and the light being divided from the darkness. So in Genesis 1, verses 3 to 5, we read, "Then God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day." Um, there is a pattern that is established here in the first day of recreation or restoration, where God will be kind of restoring some things to the way they were before, in the first age of Earth's existence, when Lucifer was the dominant angel and still obedient and faithful to God. Some things will be restored, and there will be some things that will be created out of nothing. There are three significant Hebrew words that we just need to be aware of, and we mentioned that the word last time in the original original creation. That the word here in Genesis 1:1 is bara, and it means to create things out of nothing, out of non-pre-existent material. So how does God do that? Well, he demonstrates that paradigm for us here. He speaks things into existence. God said, "Let there be light." Now, at the time that he spoke that, there wasn't light. It was dark. There was darkness over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the surface of the waters. And then at the appropriate time on this day of restoration, God spoke light into existence, and there was light. God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. He called the light day, and the darkness he called night. Day in Hebrew is yom, and night is lila. So the evening and the morning were the first day. Evening is the Hebrew word erev. It actually means a mixture of going from light to darkness. So it's as the sun sets over the horizon, things get increasingly dark until the sunlight is no longer providing light. And then we have a period, 12 hours of darkness. And then in the morning, that is Erev. I'm sorry, that is Boker. Boker is usually a reference to the sunrise. Sun peaks over the eastern horizon and begins to light up the day for another 12-hour period of time. There are some who assert that these days, these 6 days, that the word yom, day here, is being used figuratively or symbolically of perhaps a very lengthy period of time, maybe a couple of billion years for all that evolutionary stuff to take place. So it's called the day-age theory. That is nothing other than an attempt to force the Bible to conform to the dictates of evolutionary science. And that may be a happy way to try to make friends with atheistic scientists, but it's a very bad way to do a biblical theology, to interpret the Bible. And if we let the context guide us in our interpretations, the book of Exodus, chapter 20, where the 10 Commandments are written, will not let us get away with the day-age theory. In the commandment where God requires that people remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, he explains that the reason they are going to do that they're going to rest on the seventh day after 6 days of work. So it would be Sunday through Friday, work is to be done, and then on Saturday, God's people are to rest, at least under the Old Covenant, under the law of Moses. And God explains that the reason for that pattern of 6 work days followed by 1 day of rest is because, he says, in 6 days, God created the heavens and the earth. He created all the material universe. So there, God compares 2 patterns, his creating or restoring, actually, the earth for habitation once again, after it became uninhabitable when it was formless and void and flooded. He puts it all back together and makes it habitable in 6 days, just like the 6 days he requires his faithful followers to work and then rest on the seventh day, on the Saturday Sabbath. So hopefully we can just put the day age theory to rest. I recommend that if you want to try to harmonize with evolutionary science, that you embrace the gap theory, which allows for a period of time, perhaps a very lengthy evolutionary period of time, prior to the 6 days of creation. It makes much more biblical sense than the day age theory does. So like I say, hopefully we can put that to rest. We've also talked about evening and morning being kind of the markers of the beginning of a period. The evening is the marker of a beginning of a period of darkness, and then the morning is the beginning of a period of light. So it appears to me that on this creative or restorative day, God did not say, "Let there be light," until his 12-hour period of darkness had ended. And then halfway through the day, the total day, the 24-hour day, he said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Now the question arises, where did that light come from? And it usually arises in the fact that the fourth day of creation seems to be the day that God created the sun, moon, and stars, and so forth. So if the sun and moon and stars were not created until the fourth day, where did the light come from? And the usual answer that is given is God is light. And so when he said, "Let there be light," the light emanated from him and shone upon the earth. Now, that's a possibility. But I also want to emphasize, and when we get to day 4, we will see that that we have to be careful how we interpret what happened on the fourth day. And I am going to assert at this point and at that point that the sun, moon, and stars were already in existence. Why do I say that? Because in verse 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So what do we know from that? We know that the heavens, all three of them, came into existence in the original creation. And that includes the earth. So the sun, as part of outer space, is part of the heavens. And so is the moon, and so is the earth. So all these celestial orbs, I guess we'll call them, have been in existence since the first day, maybe 14 some billion years ago, who knows? So I am going to assert that they were in existence even when the earth was without form and void. The sun was in existence. Now, I do believe, if that's the case, that God caused it to stop shining because the earth was bathed in darkness. And so the earth stopped shining. There may be the sun stopped shining on the earth. There may be a couple of explanations for that, maybe naturalistic ones. The sun being a star itself, maybe behaving like a star. I understand that some stars experience a dark star phenomenon where the gravitational pull is such that light can't escape from them, and that may have occurred. And so that could be it. God might have brought about a covering for the sun so that its light couldn't be seen. There may have been a covering for the earth, like the earth may have been covered with dense clouds, so the sun could not be seen even when it was shining. God may have created some kind of a shield or an obstacle or block between the two. The answer is, I don't know how God did it. but the Bible says that he did it. So the sun, during that period of time that the earth was formless and void, the sun was not shining and providing a period of day and night on the earth. It was dark all the time. So God can do that. Whether or not I can come up with a natural explanation or a theory about how it took place, the Bible says that the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. So it was. Look, God created the entire material universe. He created the sun, moon, and stars, so he can make them behave however he wants to. He has the power to bring them into existence and the power to regulate them. If God can turn on the light of the sun, I suggest, if he can turn on the light by speaking it into happening, then he can turn it off also by saying, let there be darkness. So however he did it during the formlessness and void period. The earth was dark. And then in the midst of that first day of creation, I would suggest that the 12 hours of darkness were either the entirety of the period of without form and void, or at least a portion of it, the last 12 hours of however long it was formless and void and dark. And then God spoke light into existence. I think that means he just turned on the sunlight. Because it will appear from during the rest of the 6 days of restoration that the normal sun earth relationship is happening. The earth is rotating, and when that hemisphere of the earth that's pointed toward the sun is happening, then that hemisphere is light, and when it's facing away from the sun, then there's darkness. So that appears to me to have happened here on the first day. One thing to keep in mind also as we're reading at any point in the history of the Bible is that the consistent point of beginning a new day, I think throughout the Bible, is that a day begins at evening. When the sun sets below the horizon, that is the beginning of a new day. So today, the day that I'm preparing this video, it is drawing towards the setting of the sun on a Friday. So as soon as the sun sets this evening, from a biblical perspective, Saturday begins. Doesn't begin at midnight. It doesn't begin at sunrise tomorrow morning. It begins when the sun sets, and each day begins with a period of darkness. This is a little confusing for us because we're used to beginning the day in the daylight hours, or by our timepieces, by our clocks, beginning a day at 12 of midnight. But remember, as far as we know, there weren't any clocks in those days. So God arranged for a convenient way of marking the beginning and ending of a day. And the beginning and ending of a day is when the sun sets. Then when it rises in the east in the morning, that is the beginning of the 12 hours of daylight in every day. So enough of that. Let's move on to the next day. And let me move my picture over to the other side. In Genesis 1:6-8, we read, "Then God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." Now, this division of the waters that the Bible is talking about at this point is not the division of the waters on the surface of the earth, making part dry land and part, oceans and lakes and things like that. That's not what's being discussed. What's being discussed is one body of waters that is on the earth, and another body of waters that is above the earth, as we'll see in verse 7. Thus God made the firmament. The Hebrew word for firmament is rakia. And I think it's being used kind of symbolically here, figuratively. A rakia is like a hammered out metal lid to a pot. It's a covering. So if we look at the firmament from the perspective of a covering, I think it's a good description for the first heaven, or the atmosphere that surrounds the earth. And you don't have to get too far away from the surface of the earth before you start to experience the rakia disappearing. I used to fly airplanes for a living, and one of the things that you have to do when you fly airplanes at any kind of an altitude at all is those airplanes have to be prepared to provide oxygen for the pilot and the passengers above 14,000 feet, or people will get hypoxic. So there's not enough oxygen in the atmosphere above about 14,000 feet for people to survive very long, and airplanes crash because of that, because pilots get hypoxic and then they don't do a good job of flying those airplanes. And of course, if you get up very high at all, the atmosphere kind of disappears. So I don't know exactly how high above the Earth's surface you need to go, but there is the first heavens that surrounds the Earth, and I think that's what's being described here. The King James and New King James use the term firmament, and this is the only place I've ever heard the word firmament used, so I don't really know what a firmament is. Newer translations of the Bible use the term expanse, and that's a good word. That sounds like the atmosphere surrounding the earth. Let's kind of go with expanse or firmament or the atmosphere. And so verse 7 goes on to say that God made a firmament or an expanse, an atmosphere, and divided the waters which were under the firmament, so that would be the waters on the earth, from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. First heaven, atmosphere around the earth. Of course, there is a heaven above the firmament, above the first heaven. That's the second heaven. It's outer space, where all the rest of the material stuff of the universe is. But there's a clear division here between the first and second heavens, and the atmosphere that we live in is called the rakia, the first heaven. So evening and morning were the second day. Okay, now I remember when I was a kid, and I wanted to be a believer in God, and I wanted to embrace his Bible, but I also wanted to be an embracer of the science that I was learning at school. I was a public school kid, so I was learning evolutionary science. And one of the things that troubled me as I began reading my Bible is I only had to get about 7 verses into the Bible where I was reading something that was not harmonious with the science that I was learning. And I mean, also with just, I mean, the perception of reality that even as a little kid I had. I was pretty sure that there was no water up above the atmosphere. So that troubled me. Some Christian people tried to answer that question for me, saying that the waters above the firmament were the clouds floating around with rainwater in them. That didn't satisfy me very much, and still doesn't today. So I had that problem. And if I was able to get past that problem, then I ran into another problem when I got into the chapters of Genesis after chapter 1, but still early chapters of Genesis, where you have these genealogies where Bible characters are living to be nearly 1,000 years old. Methuselah is said to have lived 969 years. Adam, the first man himself, lived 930 years. just about everybody was living 7 or 8 or 900 years before they died. And that seemed to me to be defying reality. So I had two main scientific issues that were preventing me from being able to trust in the Bible, from being able to believe what was in the Bible. And actually, it took me a very long time to come up with a resolution, which is a theory. I'm going to share with you my theory about how these twin problems are related to each other, and how I think the Bible provides an explanation. So, as we look at the Earth, like from outer space, as we look from the perspective of outer space at the Earth, there appears to be no waters above the heavens. At one time, there may have been, but they don't seem to be there now. So how am I going to resolve that? Well, if we look into the rest of our solar system, there is a planet that does have waters above its rakia, above its atmosphere, and that is the planet Saturn. I've got a book up here in the upper right-hand corner of the picture that I'm showing you. And when you looked at the cover of this book, you may have thought that the picture here is a picture of Saturn. But if you look a little bit closer, you'll see that this is not Saturn, but it's the Earth. And Larry Cloud in this book is suggesting that at one point, very early on in its history, the Earth had rings around it, like Saturn has rings around it now. And if God made one planet with rings, why not make two planets with rings? There may be a very good reason for the rings of Saturn to be there. One of the things we do know about Saturn is that the composition of those rings is water in the form of ice, but it's water that's out there making those rings. Another thing we know about Saturn is that it rotates considerably faster than the Earth does. And when you've got a planet rotating at high speed, if you've got water out there beyond the rakia, out there in the upper atmosphere, if that planet rotates fast enough, it will hold, like the centrifugal force will cause the ice or the water that's above the firmament to stay in orbit, to stay in circulation. And if that planet rotates fast enough to keep it in orbit, just barely fast enough to keep it in orbit, then the waters can, be sort of like a covering of the Earth, not a disc-shaped thing like that. The faster the planet rotates, the more disc-like those waters become, because any water that would be in the like the top portion or the bottom portion of the planet is pulled by centrifugal force out, like above the equator, where the planet rotates, and forms a disc-like thing. But if this would slow down, then the waters would draw closer to the atmosphere and would provide more of a covering over the whole of the planet. But it would still have to be rotating fast enough to keep the waters above the surface of the Earth in orbit. So that being the case, let's apply those principles to the Earth. Let's say that starting with these 6 days of restoration, that the Earth was spinning a lot faster than it is now. Let me put some numbers with this. The circumference of the Earth is about 25,000 miles. So if the Earth rotates once in a 24-hour period of time, that would mean the angular velocity, or the speed that like one point on the equator of the Earth is rotating, the speed of that rotation would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,100 miles an hour, 1,100 miles per hour. And you might say, well, if the Earth was spinning that fast, the wind would just like rip us apart. Because if you've ever been in a 1,000-mile-an-hour wind, and probably none of you have, I wonder how many of you have ever traveled in a vehicle 1,100 miles an hour. I have. I used to fly fighter planes for a living. I flew the McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II, which was capable of Mach 2 flight. And 1,100 miles per hour is somewhere in the neighborhood approaching Mach 2. But the interesting thing about the Earth is that not only does the surface of the Earth rotate, but the atmosphere around it rotates with it. So although we are traveling currently now at the speed that the Earth is rotating now, our angular velocity is about 1,100 miles per hour. You don't even feel it. Sometimes you walk out of your house and the atmosphere just feels like it's still. There's not even a breeze. And yet you're traveling, your angular velocity is 1,100 miles per hour. So God could, if he desired, speed up the rotation of the Earth to keep all the water above the firmament out there in orbit, maybe in kind of extended disk-like rings like Saturn, or maybe the rotation wouldn't be quite that fast. And so the waters above the firmament would form more of a sort of a canopy above the surface of the Earth. Obviously thicker or more, there would be more mass at the equators, and probably little or nothing at the North and South poles. But that would be one way that God could put waters above the firmament and keep them there by keeping the Earth rotating at a much faster rate than it rotates now. So let's apply that theory to my second problem, that people in the early days of the Bible were living very, very long lifespans. And I mean like 10 times the lifespan that people live now. So would that have any effect? I dare say that, I mean, we've been talking about clocks and timepieces and so forth. People in Bible times, as far as we know, didn't have timepieces. And so they weren't able to, like have a watch on their wrist or a clock on their wall that told them how old they were getting. They would just have to count the days and nights. And, from evening to evening, that would be one day. And you would just keep counting those days, realizing that 30 of those days are a month, and, 360 to 365 of those are a year. And you would just count the rotations of the Earth, and you would maybe mark those counts down on your primitive calendars. And by the time you came to the end of your lifespan, by the time you died, you would have enough rotations of the Earth, enough days and nights, that would add up to 900 plus years, because the Earth was rotating so fast. So in a what we would call a standard lifespan of, say, 70 or 80 years, if the Earth is rotating, I don't know, 7 or 10 times as fast as it's rotating now, there would be 7 or 10 times as many days and nights in your life. And if that is the measure of a lifetime, then you would have lots higher numbers. So Methuselah may not have lived any longer than my dad lived. He died at 93. But there may have been a lot more rotations of the Earth in Methuselah's lifetime than in my dad's lifetime. So That may explain why people lived so long. But we also notice that after the flood of Noah's Ark, the lifespans of people dramatically decrease about tenfold. Some people in the Bible story are still living to be over 100 years, maybe approaching 200 years, but that's a dramatic decrease. And it happens suddenly. Methuselah died the year before the flood. In fact, his name means Methu Shalach. It means when he dies, God will send it. What did God send? The flood. So the prophetic name of this individual marked the time when the flood happened. And after the flood, people live much shorter lifespans. So where did the waters of the flood come from? I suggest that the way God brought those waters above the firmament out of orbit and into the atmosphere, where, of course, the ice of the water out there in orbit in space would condense and form water droplets and fall upon the earth. I would say that's where the floodwaters came from. When we get to Genesis 6, 7, and 8, we will talk about the source of the waters. One of the sources was that the underground aquifers provided a lot of the water that flooded the earth, but also the windows of the heavens were open and the waters fell. Well, once they fell to the earth, God just left them here on the earth. So my sense is that Larry Cloud is probably right in this book. And there are some other books that suggest this theory. Some of the other theories for the waters above the firmament were a vapor canopy that covered the earth and kind of blocked out the harmful rays of the sun that produce radiation and cause aging and things like that. A series of books that I'm familiar with by Immanuel Velikovsky proposed the vapor canopy theory. And he too, would say that the source of the floodwaters was the vapor canopy, which isn't there anymore. So kind of two versions of the same theory and maybe an explanation for those two problems. But because those theories sound appealing to me, I no longer struggle with what I perceived as an obvious falsehood in the scriptures. And this brings up another point. One of the things that I have discovered is that the longer I study the Bible, the more convinced I am that it's true and that there are no mistakes and that it's totally reliable for as a foundation for building one's life and a relationship with God. So let's move on past the first day. We come to the second day in Genesis 1, 9 through 13. God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place and let dry land appear. And it was so. So we're no longer talking about the waters that are above the firmament. They're up there in orbit somehow, in some way. But now we turn our focus to the surface of the planet, and God gathered the waters under the heavens, under the rakia, together into one place. This gathering together in one place in Hebrew is called a mikvah. And incidentally, that's also the name for a baptismal pool, or kind of a hot tub idea from biblical times where people were baptized. So a mikvah is gathering together of waters into one place, and that's what we've got here. And God said, let dry land appear. Now remember, the earth, when it became formless and void, was covered by waters of a flood. And because darkness was upon the surface of the deep, I would suggest that for one reason or another, the sunlight wasn't shining on it. And so those flood waters were probably frozen. I imagine the earth was a big ice ball. But once the light appears, that would thaw out all of the ice, and the earth would still be covered with flood waters. But God gathers them all into appropriate places. And how does he do this? So he speaks it into being. He causes things to happen by speaking it, and it was so. So God called the dry land earth, Eretz. So the whole planet can be called Eretz. The earth can, just the dry parts can be called the earth as opposed to the seas. The gathering together of the waters he called seas. The Yam, Yam is the Hebrew word for seas. It's similar to the word for day, but still a little bit different. God saw that it was good. And God said, let the earth bring forth, whoops, sorry about that. God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit trees that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself. That is, the fruit of the fruit trees contains seed that can make more trees and more fruit. So God is establishing a cycle here of creating greenery that produces fruit. God has a purpose for that fruit. So he creates fruit trees that produce fruit with the seed in them, so more trees can be made, more fruit can be born. And the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind. We'll have a little more to say about kind a little bit later, but it's, particular kinds of trees. There are all different sorts of trees, oaks and maples and apple trees and pear trees and peach trees, orange trees, and so forth. Whose seed is in itself on the earth. So on the dry portions of the Eretz, God plants grass and fruit trees by speaking them into existence. And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, the herb that yields its seed according to its kind. And I think that would include like grain, crops of grain, barley and wheat and maize and all the yummy stuff that comes up from the fields. The earth brought forth grass, the herb that yields its seed according to its kind, and the tree that yields fruit, whose seed is in itself according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. So the evening and the morning were the third day. So God doesn't just create a lot of fruit. He creates trees that produce fruit. So there is a, what should we call this? A food cycle. There is this is reproduction. So, trees can continue to produce fruit through the years, through the ages, and so forth. So let's go to the next day, which is the fourth day, verses Genesis 1, verses 14 through 19. Then God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens. Remember, the firmament is the atmosphere, the sky, or the first heaven. God says, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night. And let them be for signs and seasons and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it was so. Then God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. And everybody is in agreement. There's no disagreement here that the two lights, the two great lights, the greater of the two great lights is the sun. Everybody agrees. And the lesser of the two great lights is the moon. Everybody agrees with that. And it makes it sound like, and he made the stars also. No disagreement there. It says stars, it means stars. So it sounds very much like the sun, moon, and stars did not come into existence until the fourth day. And yet light appeared on the first day. So some of you are just delighting to laugh at me about the foolish little story I told you earlier in this lesson about how the light that God brought into existence was the sun. But I'm going to stick with that because I believe what is being described here is not those celestial lights coming into existence, but God assigning a purpose. So he doesn't say, well, what he does say, I've done some underlining here to emphasize what I'm getting at. Let there be, I'm saying, is not a command to come into existence um, from non-pre-existing material. But I'm saying this is a purpose clause. Let there be these celestial bodies to do something, to divide for signs and seasons, for days and years, for lights in the firmament, to give light on the earth. And it was so. So God is talking about a purpose here, not bringing something that doesn't already exist into existence. So again, in the beginning, the very first manifestation of creation included the heavens and the earth. Now, here's the word heavens without the little s added in. So this is true to the old King James Version here, heaven and earth. But we know from the Hebrew that this is plural. So it's all three heavens. It's the atmosphere around the earth. It's the solar system, stars, sun, moon, and stars. It all came into existence here, not here. It was already in existence on the fourth day, but God assigns a purpose to the lights of the firmament. One other thing that I need to emphasize here is that it sounds like these lights, the sun, moon, and stars, are in the firmament of the heavens. Now, if you take that too literally, you would say that it makes it sound like the sun is in the atmosphere of the earth. And I mean, the size, the math just doesn't add up. But when you look out to outer space, when you view the sun from Earth, or when you view the moon from the earth or the stars from the earth, it appears that the sun, moon, and stars are a part of, the rakia. It looks like they're right out there, kind of painted on the covering on the rakia. So this is definitely a figurative expression. Lights be in the firmament of the heavens, like out there painted on the firmament. But we actually know that they are spheres that are in their various orbits in the solar system, and of course way beyond our galaxy and our solar system and so forth. So God assigns the various lights in our solar system to divide the day from the night and let them be for signs and for seasons. Now and for days and for years. We have already discussed one of the purposes of the rotation of the earth, and that is to allow the sun to shine on it half the time and not shine on it the other time. And that defines for us what a day is, a 24-hour day. So in that sense, the sun is fulfilling its purpose for signs and seasons, and so is the earth. The earth is doing the same thing. It rotates however fast God wants it to determine how long a day is. But then also for seasons. Now, if we mark the days on our calendar based on the rotation of the earth, what do we use to measure a month? Well, the way we measure a month is we go from a new moon to a full moon to to the next new moon, to the little sliver of the moon. And we can watch the cycles of the moon. When the moon first appears as a little sliver, that's the beginning of a month. And when it disappears as a sliver and then starts up again, that's the end of a month and the beginning of the next one. What is that? That is a rotation of the moon around the earth. And so God put he put the earth, he put the sun, and he put the moon in the positions that he put them in the solar system and the rotation of the planets around the sun, to mark these signs and seasons. how do we mark a year? That would be a full trip of the Earth around the sun, like one orbit of the Earth around the sun. And of course, because of the tilt of the Earth, there are some seasons that are warm, hot, some are cool and cold, and so we can mark them. And we can notice where the sun is positioned on the whether it's high above the equator or low on the equator, and that will tell us what season it is. And we can just notice that cycle repeats every year, and it's pretty accurate. It's about 360 to 365 and a quarter days. And so we can measure our years that way. So before there were watches, before there were mechanical ways to measure time, God arranged the solar system so we could know what day it is, so we can know what month it is, so we can know what year it is, and so on and so forth, for days and for years. The special holidays in the on the biblical calendar occur so many days after the new moon. The new moon was very significant in the religious calendar, because then you would start counting the days, and you would know when Passover was, and you would know when Pentecost was, and the Feast of Tabernacles and so forth, Day of Atonement. So that was all done by celestial means, and that's why God put it out there. And he also put them out there to provide light on the earth, and it was so. Of course, you got the sun shining on the earth during the daylight hours, but even at night, you've got the reflection of the sun off of the moon onto the earth. So there's a little bit of light on the earth, even in the nighttime, and God arranged it so it would be that way. God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was so, and the evening and morning were the fourth day. Now, let me touch on one more subject, and that is signs in the heavens. A very popular practice nowadays is astrology and astronomy. A study of the stars and the constellations and things like that. And there's a lot of superstition that has kind of entered into a study of the stars, and a lot of people think that it is the star. And this goes back to the idea that the material universe is infinite, and therefore it has divine powers. And so a lot of people think that the stars are trying to communicate things to us about our lives and what's going to happen in the future and so forth. And there may actually be a little bit of truth to that. God may have put messages in the constellations of the heavens. I've got a couple of books on the screen. One is called The Witness of the Stars by E.W. Bullinger, and the other is The Gospel in the Stars by Joseph Seiss. These are basically identical books, and what they say is that modern day astrology has come to us in a very corrupted form. And a lot of people think that if you study the stars, I don't know, from the proper perspective, like you can look up into the sky and you can see all these images. You can see the bear, you can see the fish, you can see the virgin, and you can see the lion. And they're like, connect the dots in the sky. Well, that's what it's come down to now, because the signs in the heavens have been corrupted. But if you would go back to the very beginning, to Earth's early ages, God may have been preaching the gospel and telling his story about his plans for the universe in the stars of heaven. But it's not in these, so-called creative pictures that are in the sky. It is in the names, and let me emphasize, probably the Hebrew names of the most prominent stars in the heavens. And remember, when Adam was created, he named stuff, which I assume included the names of the stars. And I think he did so by the inspiration of God. So if you start with the brightest star in the heavens, and then the orbs, the planets or whatever, or moons that, are a part of that region. I think they're called the deacons of those stars. The brightest one is Virgo, and that's a Latin word that means virgin. It's Bethulah or Alma in Hebrew. And that's where the story of the gospel begins, is with the Virgin Mary and the virgin birth of the Savior of the world. And then if you go to the next star, decreasing by one increment in brightness, you come to the various constellations until the least bright of the brightest of the stars is the lion. Leo, I think, is either Latin or Greek for that, but it's Aryeh in Hebrew. And that, of course, is the Lion of Judah coming in judgment to set up his kingdom. So if you're interested in the signs, the pictures in the heavens, the story of gospel being taught in the stars, I recommend either one of these books, Bullinger or Seiss, for that purpose. Let's move on to the fifth day, the creatures of the sea and the birds coming into existence. Genesis 1:20 through 23. God said, "Let the waters abound with an abundance of living creatures." That would be the fish. "And let birds fly above the earth across the face of the firmament of the heavens." And there, of course, the birds are well within the boundaries of the firmament, but they are, appear to be flying across the face of the firmament. So God created great sea creatures. Now, I'm pretty sure this is the word bara, which means to create from nothing, which would be an indication that in the original creation, in the prehistoric age, there may not have been these great sea creatures. This may be a brand new innovation for the 6 days of renovation. So maybe these great sea creatures, God brought them into existence from nothing. "And every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded according to their kind." Leminechem. The Hebrew word min here, kind of right in the middle of this word, is translated as the word kind. "And every winged bird according to its kind." Leminehu, the word is slightly different here just because of the gender of the noun, but here, right in the middle of the word, we have min. So min in Hebrew is translated in the King James and New King James Version as kind. And God saw that it was good. And basically kind just means type, like a general category of creatures. And God saw that it was good. "And God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." So evening and morning were the fifth day. So when God made the grass of the field and the fruit trees on the dry land, he put within them the capability of reproducing. The fruit, the apple has apple seeds in it. And if it falls to the ground, it gets buried, those seeds die, and then they, I was going to say ferment. That's not the proper word. But if they're buried in the ground, they take nutrition from the ground, and like those seeds produce a brand new fruit tree. Same with with the grain. When those seeds fall to the ground, they produce a brand new creature of the same kind. Well, with the animals, God commands them to be fruitful and multiply. This is the principle of reproduction. That's why he makes all this stuff male and female. And incidentally, I spent the first 7 years of my ministry in farming country in Nebraska. And one of the farmers once told me that corn is male and female. And I thought for sure this guy was pulling my leg. But the more I study it, the more I realize that corn is male and female. And that the ears of corn have to be fertilized by the tassels up on the top. I don't know the science of it all, but I don't think that guy was lying to me. I think even the plants of the field are kind of male and female. And so there's, in a sense, kind of a sexual reproduction going on there. So both the birds and the fish are supposed to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and seas and let the birds multiply on the earth. So evening and morning were the fifth day. I slipped. One thing I want to talk about is with kind here. I don't think the Bible is being scientifically technical in using this term. So I know in, I guess it's biology, that the categories of living things go from kingdom to phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. And species is the most narrow of those categories, and kingdom is the most general. So I did a little research to find where kind in the Bible would fall. And the conclusion I came to is that it's somewhere in the vicinity of order and family, which is kind of a medium category of definiteness. And I get the impression that the kinds of animals that God created are like you can't go across the boundaries of kind. So like a bird and a fish can't mate and produce, something, because that is crossing a boundary of these categories that where God has drawn the line, and it's just not going to work. But within species and within genus, there are some four-legged creatures. I guess you can mate a horse and a donkey, and you get a mule or something like that. I'm out of my field of expertise, but that would not be crossing one of those boundaries. So I think that's the scientific status that we're talking about here. Let's go to the sixth day of creation. Then God said, let the earth bring forth every living creature according to its kind, cattle and creeping thing and beast of the earth. So these are land animals, each according to its kind. Here's our word kind again. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. So all the creepy stuff, what would that be? The lizards and the amphibians and stuff, I suppose, reptiles. God saw that it was good. And God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness. Let's talk about this a little bit. Let us. Us is plural. And it's plural in the Hebrew. It's very definite. These are the three persons of the Trinity talking amongst themselves and discussing the idea of making a human being in the image of God. Some theologians have suggested that the one, like the numerically singular God, the monotheistic God, is talking to the angels. But if that's the case, God is kind of inviting the angels to be co-creators with of the human beings, and that is very definitely not the case. Angels are created beings as well. So the three persons of the Trinity say, let us make man in our image. Again, it's plural, according to our likeness. Image is tselem in Hebrew. It used to be, when cameras used to have film in them, tselem used to be the name of, when you would go to Israel and you wanted to buy film for your camera, you would go in the gift store and ask for tselem, and they would give you a roll of film or a cartridge of film or something like that. Now it's all digital, so my my illustration doesn't work nearly as well now as it used to. But tselem is physical likeness. It's a physical similarity. So if you want to know what God looks like, look at your brother, or look at your wife, or look at another human being And that's what God looks like in general terms. Now, each of us have our, unique distinctives in our appearance. But in all the descriptions of God's physical appearance, he's got a head, he's got a torso, two arms, two legs, sits on stuff, speaks the way we do, has ears and eyes, nose, mouth, and so forth, has all the features that he created us with. So he's the prototype, and we are made in his image, his tselem. Also likeness. I think that's dama in Hebrew, and it means characteristics. God shares emotions with us. The emotions he feels, we feel also, to a lesser, less perfect degree. Some of the characteristics of God we have as well. One of the absolutely unique things in the among all the creatures that God created is people are able to communicate by speaking and listening. We have language, and God uses that to communicate with us. He communicates with the other creatures in ways that he's determined are appropriate. But he wants to talk to us. He wants us to pray to him, so he can talk to us, and we can listen to him, and we can speak to him and tell him what's on our mind. So man is created in the image and likeness of God. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea. This is a term which implies rulership. It implies authority. It implies being placed in a position of being in control of everything that God created. And he gave that to human beings. Sometimes I wonder if that was a good idea. But it was God's idea, and he's going to perfect it and is in the process of perfecting it. So he placed us in charge of the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image, tselem, in the image of God. He created him, male and female. He created them. Now, technically here, it's saying that the him, the male, was created in God's image, but the male and the female were only created. But later here in Genesis and in other places in the Bible, the female will also be asserted to have been created in the image of God. A lot of men who kind of like to look down their nose at women assert that it was only the man that was created in God's image because God is male and so is the human man. And that makes women lesser, so women have to do whatever men tell them to do. Just not quite biblical. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. So this is the law of reproduction. He wants human beings to reproduce in the same way that animals do, but within particular boundaries, moral boundaries that God is going to provide. And we'll take a look at that in an upcoming session. So he creates them male and female with the ability to reproduce. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And then this passage continues in verse 24. God said, see, I've given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed to you. It shall be for food. So here, God explains the purpose of the grasses of the field, the grains of the field, and the fruit trees. It was to provide food for human beings, but also for the beasts. So at this point in creation history, man and beasts are all vegetarians. That will change later on in chapter 9 of Genesis. But for now, everybody's a vegetarian. Also, to every beast of the earth, it's food for every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth. In which there's life. I've given every green herb for food, and it was so. Then God saw everything he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and morning were the sixth day. Then we move into Genesis 2 to talk about the seventh day, this special day here. It says, thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished. So they were finished on the sixth day. By the end of the sixth day, All creation was done. And that's important for us, especially from a scientific perspective, because remember, the first law of thermodynamics says that matter cannot be created or destroyed, but it can only change form. So after it was all done, after God created everything, after he violated the first law of thermodynamics for 6 days, then he stopped doing it, and it all became kind of a closed system. So since everything has been created, then the first law of thermodynamics applies. Matter cannot be created unless you're God, and it cannot be destroyed. Now, what God has in store for the future, maybe it involves some more creating, but for now, there's no more creating being done, and science is right to say that. And on the seventh day, God ended his work, which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day. The Hebrew word for rested is Shabbat, from which we get the idea of the Sabbath day. The seventh day is the Sabbath day. It's the day of rest. On the seventh day, he rested on the seventh day from all his work. That would be the work of creation, which he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it. He made it a special day because in it he rested from all his work, which God had created and made. And later on in the Ten Commandments, this is going to be the basis for the 6 days of work and 1 day of rest. But what I want you to notice is, and I won't go into too much depth here about this, this is 1 day of the week where it doesn't say, and there was evening and there was morning the seventh day, which implies that the seventh day did not end, since there was no more creating to do. So God started resting. He rested throughout this day and continued to rest from the work of creation. Now, it's going to turn out that we're going to discover that there's more work for God to do in the future, but it's not work of creation, it's work of redemption. And he'll be busy about that all throughout the rest of the Bible. But when it comes to creation, he stopped working beginning on the seventh day and continued that rest into the next week, months, years, generations, millennia, and so forth. So the seventh day is intended to be an ongoing day of rest. So the cycle of working 6 days and then resting a seventh day, and after Shabbat is over, starting up on Sunday and working again, and then resting on the next seventh day, and that cycle repeating, is not what God did. He created here for 6 days, then he quit, and then he rested, and he continued to rest, and he's still resting from creation. Now, when it comes to redemption, there's one little thing I'd like to share with you before we close. And that is, when it comes to redemption, when you become a believer in Jesus Christ, you enter into that eternal rest. You no longer have to earn your way to heaven or please God with your works and your, religious character and things like that. When you believe in Jesus Christ as your Savior, you're born again, and you enter into this seventh day of rest, which is an ongoing day. So when you become a believer in Yeshua, you don't have to continue this 6 days on, 1 day off cycle. You can quit doing that. And, the New Testament, the Apostle Paul in the New Testament says, don't let anyone judge you with regarding Sabbaths. So if you want to do the 6 on, 1 off cycle, you're allowed to do it, but you don't have to. In the Old Testament, if you violated the 6 on, 1 off, they stoned you to death. But when you become a believer in Christ, this cycle of 6 days on and 1 day off is no longer necessary. It's no longer demanded by God, because he just wants you to enter into his rest and stay there for eternity. So we'll talk more about that later. Let me conclude our Bible study here by giving you the blessing. This will be from the Old Testament. I believe this is Deuteronomy, is it Deuteronomy 6:4? The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. I think that comes from Numbers 6. I think I got my Bible verses wrong. At any rate, thanks for being with us. I hope you'll tune in for the next Bible study, and we'll hope to see you then. By the way, let me say hello to my friend Scott, who's been watching these videos, and hope he's enjoying them and being blessed by them. So hi, Scott. Hope we see you for the rest of these videos.